First on BBC One, the BBC News at 9 o'clock with Michael Buerk.
The crashed jumbo may have been on fire as it took off. A crater half a mile wide marks Korean Air's latest disaster. Northern Ireland's terrorist killers have been let out for a Christmas holiday. And Christmas in a shoebox, British children's gift to the orphans of Romania. Good evening. Eyewitnesses say the Korean Air 747 cargo plane that crashed near Stansted Airport last night was on fire as it took off. 2 minutes later, it crashed in a ball of flame, killing all 4 members of the crew. An investigation has begun into the accident. Services from Stansted have been badly disrupted.
Daylight and the remains of a 747 lying in a path of destruction on the edge of an English village. Although there was no warning message from the flight crew, the Korean plane appears to have been flying towards Stansted Airport when it crashed. The initial view of investigators is that the crew may have known the flight was in trouble and had turned back, hoping to reach a runway less than 2 miles away. This is the point of impact where the Korean flight crashed. From marks in the field, it appears as if its landing gear was down. The wings clipped a tree, the engines were torn off, and then it disintegrated into thousands of pieces over a 300-yard trail. It was a 400-ton plane, and this was probably the largest piece of wreckage that remained. The destruction of the Korean flight was total. Investigators hope the answers lie with the flight data recorders. One has been found, and 150 officers today were looking for the second. Investigators will be interested in the accounts of the residents of the village of Great Hallingbury. Some say the plane may have been on fire before it crashed.
I just saw this huge glow in the sky, orange and red and pink, and then terrible silence.
And from what you saw, was the plane on fire before it crashed?
Well, there is a possibility, and things happened in milliseconds, but I did see a glow, which could have been the plane alight.
Some officials believe the plane was already on fire when it took off. Bits of engine and fuselage were found on the runway, indicating there may have been a serious engine failure.
We've got some witness sightings reporting flame or fire, possibly over a wing or one of the engines, I think shortly after the plane took off.
One of the first at the crash scene was Brian McClellan. The plane had passed meters above his house. It had reminded him of the scream of a Second World War Stuka bomber. What he saw was a wall of flame.
The flames were huge. They were so high, and the heat from the top of the flames must have been so devastating because the forest here has loads of pigeons in it. The pigeons all went up because of the explosion and whatever was going on. They flew over the top, and as they flew over the top, they just burst into flames and dropped into the fire.
Among those visiting today was John Prescott, who knows that those living under the flight path want answers.
We have agreed to work fully together, the Korean authorities, the British investigatory body, and indeed the Americans, and they are now getting together today to conduct that investigation.
Another man facing questions was the Korean ambassador. He knows that Korean Air has one of the worst safety records.
I feel very relieved that the village and the populated area was not affected.
At Stansted Airport tonight, there are still 2,500 passengers waiting to get away. Delays are now down to 4 hours, and by tomorrow morning, flights should be back to normal. Reassuring the villagers of Great Hallingbury will, however, be a much longer process. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Stansted.
The 747, which crashed last night, was the 13th Korean airplane to be lost in the last 20 years. Investigators will try to combine clues from the debris with data from the flight recorders to piece together the story of this fatal 2-minute flight.
Planes moving again at Stansted tonight after a day of disruption following the crash. A short distance from the runway, wreckage remains strewn across the countryside. So what caused the disaster? There's speculation that catastrophic engine failure may have brought down the Korean Air flight. Sources at Stansted say they saw an engine on fire as the cargo jumbo took off. And it's thought that debris from one of the engines was found on the runway. A pilot who flew jumbos for 25 years says engine failure is one of 3 possible causes.
Firstly, something happened drastically on the aeroplane and the pilot couldn't control the aeroplane after that. And it might have been something simple like 2 engines failed, flock of birds gone into them. It could be that the cargo moved aft just as they rotated, made it tail heavy, again impossible for the pilot to control, and of course an explosive device, which in this case I think we can discount.
Korean Air, like all airlines, must meet international safety standards laid down by the International Civil Aviation Organization. They cover the airworthiness of aircraft and training of pilots. It's the responsibility of the country where airlines are registered to ensure standards are maintained. If the UK Department of Transport is still concerned, it can order ramp or spot checks, including inspection of aircraft and interviews with the crew. Korean Air passed 2 ramp checks in April and 1 last December, but the airline still does have an abysmal reputation for accidents.
It wouldn't be any exaggeration to say that it's disastrous. This would be the 13th serious accident they've had since 1990 and the 5th hull loss that they've had since the big 747 disaster in Guam in 1997.
This year, Korean Air lost a flight partnership with American airline Delta after a devastating internal safety review. The airline's spending $200 million on pilot retraining, but it's thought that the Korean social culture continues to hamper cockpit teamwork. Tonight, investigators from the Korean government and the airline arrived at Heathrow to join the British inquiry. Simon Montague, BBC News.
Officials in Venezuela say it'll cost at least $15 billion and take many years to repair the damage caused by last week's devastating floods and mudslides and to rebuild the country. International aid continues to arrive, but at the moment it's not enough to help the many thousands of survivors whose homes and livelihoods have been destroyed by the disaster.
This is the image of Venezuela that's being seen around the world. The overcrowded makeshift shanty towns that have been hit so hard by the flooding. 80% of this country's population is poor. But this too is Venezuela, a shopping mall in the capital, Caracas, profiting from the wealth of a state that has oil. In fact, is one of the world's leading oil producers. Traditionally, there have been tensions between those who can spend and those who can barely survive. But in the face of a national disaster, people here say there's a sense of pulling together. It's not only the government, she told us, each one of the people is working to help each other with what they can. Here, for example, in central Caracas, the well-off are pitching in, bringing in supplies for babies, volunteering to help those with nothing left of their own. But of course, Venezuela could not survive this crisis without international aid. These supplies are being sent from Colombia. Baby food and medicine, tents and sleeping bags. This is one of dozens of international relief flights converging on the capital daily. And this is where the Red Cross matches donation to victim, as one of the many agencies helping the flood survivors.
These are from the American Red Cross. We have pots and pans and other items from the Spanish Red Cross. The Colombian Red Cross sent in these first aid kits to give out to the survivors. And then we have just different products from Red Cross societies around the world.
Charities and government alike are receiving generous donations, but they say not enough.
Will never be enough. This country is destroyed, is devastated, and people is suffering and definitely is in need.
The Red Cross today launched a national plan for recovery, saying it's time to move beyond the immediate rescue work. Aid workers now want to put people back on their feet, help them to help themselves. And they want the outside world to contribute to the expensive, time-consuming process of reconstructing Venezuela. Philippa Thomas, BBC News, Caracas.
The Maze prison in Northern Ireland is almost empty tonight after more than 120 convicted terrorists were let out to spend Christmas with their families. They've been given 12 days parole. Only 2 loyalist remand prisoners are left inside, guarded by a small staff.
A kiss and hug for multiple killer John Kettley, the IRA man who murdered 9 innocent people when his bomb ripped apart a fish shop on Belfast Shankill Road 6 years ago. He was one of more than 120 convicted loyalist and Republican terrorists freed from the Mies prison for 12 days Christmas home leave. Loyalist killer Michael Stone was also freed. He shot dead 3 mourners at an IRA funeral in Belfast 11 years ago. He left behind the austere prison regime to be driven away in a luxury car. Critics of the leave scheme say it's unfair terrorist killers can spend Christmas with their families, a privilege they denied their victims. Others believe it's vital in securing peace.
I think there's a general recognition this is part of the peace process. I also think there's a general feeling in this community that we're moving on from violence and into something new, and the process of prisoner release is all part of that.
The prisoners returned to jail in early January, but will be freed permanently by July. At the height of the Troubles, this jail housed more than 700 of Northern Ireland's most dangerous terrorists. This Christmas, there'll be just 2 inmates behind these walls. And if everything goes according to plan in the peace process, it will be closed by this time next year. Tom Coulter, BBC News at the Mies prison.
The United States says Russia has failed to live up to international standards on human rights in its offensive in Chechnya. The Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot accused the Russians of killing Chechen civilians indiscriminately. But despite the criticism, the Russians have continued their attacks on the capital, Grozny. Jonathan Charles has spent the day in Chechnya.
Another shell slams into Grozny. Night and day, the barrage rarely ceases. For the thousands of civilians trapped in the Chechen capital, the constant Russian artillery attacks are taking their toll. Life amidst the shattered buildings is becoming intolerable. Today, Russia was accused by America of failing to live up to international standards of human rights, a diplomatic way of saying that Russia doesn't care about the impact of the war on innocent civilians. This woman says that after 2 months of bombardment, she has no water, gas or light. There's nothing here, absolutely nothing. But the Chechen Islamic rebels will continue to defend their besieged city. Now they claim to have enough ammunition and food to last until the spring. Although Russian troops are already pouring into Grozny's suburbs, the Chechens insist the flame of independence won't be snuffed out. Many Chechen families are grieving for their lost sons there. The Dadaevs are mourning the death of 28-year-old Ruslan, a rebel fighter killed in Grozny during a tank attack 2 days ago. His sister Ramiza told us that if she was to meet a Russian now, she'd kill him. She says her brother's death won't be the last. The rebels will fight until there's no one left. So the hatred lives on. The Russians believe that they'll take Grozny by the new year, but families like this, who've sacrificed so much, say it'll never happen. Chechens won't give up the fight. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Chechnya.
A British man who doused his former girlfriend with petrol and set her alight has been jailed for 19 years in Australia. The court heard how Stephen Ray, who's from Perthshire, wanted to destroy Gabriella Mazzali's life after she broke off their relationship. She's had a number of operations for burns to more than 90% of her body and is scarred for life. Police are to review the case of Susie Lamplugh, the London estate agent who disappeared 13 years ago. Earlier this month, her family said they'd been told her body had been buried at a former army barracks in Worcestershire. But police say their review doesn't mean that there's been a breakthrough in the case. A man's been charged in connection with a huge consignment of guns and drugs found in a lorry at Dover. It includes 25 pistols and amphetamines and ecstasy tablets worth £2 million. They were hidden in part of a crane which was being brought in from Belgium. The Rwandan government wants to bring charges against a former army colonel who was implicated in the genocide there 5 years ago and is now living in Britain. Colonel Tharciste Mvunyi was the military governor of 2 provinces at the height of the killing and stands accused of organising hundreds of thousands of murders. In his second report from Rwanda, Raggy Omar looks at the evidence against Colonel Mvunyi. You may find some of the pictures upsetting.
This is the town of Butare in southern Rwanda, where Colonel Muvunyi was the military commander during the genocide. 5 years ago, in a carefully organized program of killings, hundreds of thousands of people were systematically murdered throughout the area. A short drive outside Butare is a place called Murambi. It has been preserved as a memorial to the genocide. When the killings began, up to 50,000 people came here to hide. Soldiers under Colonel Muvunyi and their militia allies surrounded the compound. For 3 days, the frightened and exhausted mass of people waited to be killed. Then on the night of April the 21st, the killings began. They were hunted down as they tried to escape, with guns, machetes, grenades and knives. Even the clothes they were killed in are now part of this memorial. Tens of thousands of people fled here to Murambi, hoping to find sanctuary, but instead they were just slaughtered. Colonel Tharsis Muvunyi is accused of being responsible for what happened here at Murambi and in other massacres throughout the region. There are 72 chambers full of the remains of nearly 30,000 people, 3 times the total number killed in the Kosovo conflict. This man is on death row in Rwanda. He's been found guilty of genocide and crimes against humanity for leading an attack on a health center where thousands had taken shelter. But he told us that his orders came from Colonel Muvunyi.
At the health centre, Muvunyi was there, conducting patrols. He was in a jeep full of soldiers when people were throwing grenades into the health centre and shooting people inside.
And if you had a message for Colonel Muvunyi in London, what would it be?
You are the one who was the head of the military in the area. You were going about all over Butare with your soldiers. If it's not you who ordered the killings, then come and explain this to Rwandans.
The Rwandan government has prepared a file of evidence against Colonel Muvunyi. He is accused of genocide and crimes against humanity. There is page upon page of testimonies from witnesses.
He's a big fish, no doubt about it. He was certainly at the top in a situation where his forces committed very serious crimes, killed hundreds of thousands of people.
This is Colonel Muvunyi today. We found him not in Rwanda, but in a public library in southeast London. He and his family have been living as political refugees in Lewisham. He refused to answer any questions.
Could we ask you a few questions about it, Colonel Muvunyi? Would that be possible?
The British government and the International War Crimes Tribunal have known of his presence here for a year.
Rwanda during the genocide. Can you confirm that?
But so far, the tribunal has not asked Britain to hand him over. There is no extradition treaty between Rwanda and Britain. However, the Rwandan government says it is now preparing the ground to bring a case against Colonel Muvunyi here in Britain. But for now, he continues to be a free man. Raggy Omar, BBC News.
Here, one of Neil Hamilton's main backers in his failed libel action against Mohammed Al-Fayed says he'll refuse to contribute towards Mr Al-Fayed's costs. They could add up to more than £1 million, and the Harrods owner says he intends to recover them. But the Earl of Portsmouth says he won't pay and will go to court himself if necessary.
The JCBs.
The Earl of Portsmouth has revealed himself as one of the substantial contributors to Neil Hamilton's fighting fund. But he doesn't want Mohammed Al-Fayed to get his hands on his money. He's instructed a solicitor with that aim in mind.
I shall be vigorously resisting any attempt by Mr Fayed to take my cash. If he wants me to contribute towards his costs, he will have to take me to court.
OK, thank you very much. Mr Hamilton's biggest financial backers could be forced to pay up if he can't find the money himself. He's admitted he's broke and facing bankruptcy. A libel expert says the law is clear. Backers can be held liable, but the courts won't necessarily enforce payment.
The judge does have a discretion, and he may well take the view that these people backed, in good faith, a fighting fund to enable a case which Hamilton simply couldn't have brought otherwise, and that they had no reason to suspect at that stage that Hamilton was going to lose the case, and they acted in good faith. So I think there's a very good chance that the judge will not make such an order.
Mohammed Al-Fayed, who used some of the country's leading libel barristers and solicitors, says he'll do everything he can to recover his costs. The issue of whether those who bankroll court actions should be held liable is now being addressed by the government.
This is a much wider issue than the Hamilton case, and one that we're going to look at in a consultation paper next year. We form no views, but we're going to start a public debate on this.
But any change will come too late to solve Neil Hamilton's financial dilemma. If he or his backers can't or won't pay, then he and his opponent will be back in court again soon. Jane Peel, BBC News.
The British astronaut Michael Foale is nearly halfway through a 6-hour spacewalk, floating 370 miles above the Earth. With the Swiss astronaut, he's carrying out repairs to the Hubble telescope, which has been out of action since mid-November. Earlier, 2 other astronauts carried out the second longest spacewalk in history.
Have the door open, keep an eye on what's inside if you can.
Michael Foale carefully opens the Hubble telescope's bay doors. Inside lies the Space Telescope's brain, a computer which had to be slowly and painstakingly removed before a newer, better, faster model can be connected.
It seems to be free. It is free. We need to move out a little bit more. I concur. Jean-François, if you could bring us out from the telescope, roughly 4 feet. 4 feet out. Out.
It's an extremely tricky manoeuvre, one even an experienced astronaut can't take for granted.
This does not look the way I remember it for P1. It's more of my phase configuration than
Later, guidance sensors, which are used to direct the telescope into space to gather scientific data, will also be installed. Tonight's spacewalk with Swiss astronaut Claude Nicollier is scheduled for 6 hours, but yesterday's, which Foale helped guide from the Discovery shuttle, extended into an 8.25-hour marathon for his colleagues.
Okay, I'm ready for you to turn. Okay.
During this time, 2 US astronauts replaced sensor units and all 6 gyroscopes, as well as making improvements to the wiring from the solar panels to each of its 6 batteries to prevent them overheating. Foale's spacewalk has at least 4 hours to go. The third and final spacewalk will take place tomorrow. The shuttle will release the telescope on Christmas Day, and because NASA wants to avoid any possible bites from the Millennium Bug, it will return to Earth on Monday. Sue Nelson, BBC News.
Thousands of children at schools across Britain have joined in this year's shoebox appeal to send boxes of Christmas toys to children in poorer countries. Many of the boxes are bound for Romania, where the fall of communism 10 years ago exposed the pitiful state of the country's orphanages. A decade on, they're still crammed with unwanted or orphaned children, many of them disabled. Alison Holt followed one consignment of Christmas boxes from the village of Cawood in Yorkshire on its long journey across Europe to Cernavodă in Romania.
It's a busy day at Cawood Primary near Selby in Yorkshire. These 9 to 11-year-olds are packing shoeboxes with presents for children thousands of miles away who are facing a very different Christmas to their own. Despite such differences, Katie, who's 11, has firm ideas about what the children in hospices and orphanages will like from the shoebox she's designed.
I've put sweets and like little toys, and well, they haven't got any parents, and they're a bit lonely sometimes, and when they get these boxes they're like happy.
William also believes the unknown friend who'll get his box will enjoy the surprise.
Usually they don't have anything to play with and they're lonely, and these make them happy.
The shoeboxes being loaded by the children here are heading for Romania. Last year, children across the UK filled more than 120,000 shoeboxes full of presents. This year, that figure could reach more than 300,000.
The Christmas shoeboxes are the idea of the charity Children in Distress, which works with children in places like Kosovo and Albania, as well as Romania. 4 days later, and the shoeboxes from Cawood Primary arrive in Cernavodă in eastern Romania. They and many other boxes sent by children from Scotland to the south coast will be handed out at the St Lawrence Children's Hospice. The youngsters are all HIV positive, the youngest is 4. The demand for help is high locally with new cases each month. Many of these children are orphans or their families can't afford their treatment. The charity has been here 10 years.
Unfortunately, the HIV virus doesn't go away, and we're still seeing a great need here in this town to be present.
The arrival of Santa with his shoeboxes signals the start of Christmas here. Addy is 11 and has been in the hospice for 2 years. He gets the box sent by William.
Shampoo, elephant.
And the toys and sweets picked out by Casey go to Magdalena. Addy speaks for them both.
I love you very, very much. And Christmas, Merry Christmas.
Back in Yorkshire, seeing pictures of the hospice and of Addy and Magdalena opening the gifts chosen here has made the children think hard.
We're really excited about it.
Gives them a chance to see what Christmas really means.
HIV and poverty mean the youngsters in Romania need help all year round, but the shoeboxes have been an important way of making Christmas special for both sets of children. Alison Holt, BBC News, Yorkshire.
And the main news again tonight. The latest report suggests the Korean Air 747 cargo plane, which crashed near Stansted Airport last night, was on fire as it took off. That's the latest from the BBC Newsroom this evening. Good night.
Good evening. An internal police review is to be held into the case of missing estate agent Susie Lamplugh, who disappeared 13 years ago in South London. The inquiry comes less than a month after a tip-off that Susie's body may be buried at a former army barracks near Worcester. The inquiry is expected to start next month and will last for 10 weeks.
25-year-old Miss Lamplugh went missing in July 1986. She had arranged to meet a client called Mr. Kipper at a house in Fulham, southwest London, which her firm was selling. Hopes were raised earlier this month that her body might be found. A secret source told her mother, Diana Lamplugh, where Susie had been buried. But detectives said later the information received was not new.
I think that it is a very complicated case. It has been an awful long time without any kind of ending, and we will be delighted if we can find it.
Police say the review has been ordered because of the complex twists in the case. Detective Chief Inspector Barry Webb, who led a review into the Jill Dando murder inquiry, will take charge of the new Lamplugh inquiry. Guy Hand, Newsroom South East.
Last night's crash in Stansted has been greeted with a sense of foreboding in the town of Bishop Stortford, just a few miles down the road. This month has seen a massive rise in the number of planes drifting off course and over the town. The local MP fears any crash over such a built-up area could be catastrophic.
Planes once again departing from Stansted, but the proximity of the Korean crash to a village has rekindled nightmare visions of a plane ploughing into a built-up area. This fear has been heightened this month after changes to flight paths have meant that a significant number of planes have been passing over the town of Bishop Stortford.
Well, the nightmare scenario is that the plane that took off last night got out of control in the way that it clearly did, and in fact crashed on the top of Bishop Stortford.
We looked out the door the other day, there were 5 in line, almost crossing at different strategic points.
The Civil Aviation Authority, who are responsible for flight paths, told Newsroom South East the initial change was brought in to try and improve flying accuracy. There were some aircraft drifting off track. The route was revised on December the 18th and accuracy has since improved. Where possible, planes are routed to avoid flying over built-up areas for reasons of noise and safety. But in the past few weeks, residents in this town have become increasingly unnerved about the volume of aircraft passing overhead. Tim Samuels, Newsroom South East, Bishop Stortford.
That's it, but we're back tomorrow morning in Breakfast News with regular travel and weather updates. And of course, there's South East News round the clock on CFAX, page 160, and Sport on page 390. But for now, from all of us here, that's the Late Team. A very good night to you. Good night.
It's back to the beginning of this year and there's a new bloke in charge. There's trouble at the big top on BBC 2 shortly.
Good evening to you. Just 2 taps of weather about at the moment. Wet and windy, or very wet and very windy. That seems to be the way of things for tonight and through Christmas Eve as well. Now, there was a brief brighter slot today in the east. We saw 6 hours of sunshine over at Clacton before the cloud piled in from the Atlantic, and there was plenty of rain rolling into western areas too. And it now lies down through central parts of the UK. So it's still pretty severe, that weather. Parts of Northern Ireland, a bit of southwest Scotland, parts of northwest England and Wales too, still seeing these gusts up to 60 miles an hour or so, and some heavy driving rain to come. That band of rain now pushing right across the West Country, pushing up through the Midlands into the Birmingham area, and now running onto the Pennines again with those gale force gusts pushing up from the south. Things will ease down eventually, but we've still got some more wet weather coming down across the rest of England and Wales in the next few hours before it begins to clear again with blustery showers following on from the north. And we're also going to see a wraparound of frequent showers and pretty damaging winds perhaps running up through the central lowlands come breakfast time on Christmas Eve. Well, temperatures tonight should hold up pretty well, but that wind is going to be quite a feature still across many parts of the country. And then tomorrow it'll pick up again. The next system coming in from the southwest pretty steadily, so again it's wind and rain piling northwards. Now, first thing in the morning, I think the main rain band will be down here through these more extreme southern counties, just clipping the Thames estuary. A brighter slot for a while, but still some rather blustery showers and frequent showers too, running across central and western parts of Scotland. It may improve for a while across many areas, but the rain will start to push northwards, then accelerate as we go through the afternoon, so turning wet and very windy once again with southwesterly gales here, and staying pretty windy too across much of Scotland with some snow above about 500 to 600 metres. Mild in the south, up to 12 in some places, rather chillier 7 to 9 further north, but that's about the way of things for Christmas Day. Still some sleet around over northern Scotland, a bit of hail and sleet in some of the showers further south into the Welsh mountains, but some sunshine as well, especially in the east, and much the same pattern too on Boxing Day. That's it from me. May I wish you a very good night.
Experience the dawn of a new millennium with BBC One in one of the most ambitious live broadcasts ever. Be part of the millennium's biggest bash with comedy, entertainment and live music.
Open our eyes and see 21st century.
Join BBC One's countdown to the new year as we bring you the people and events that will take you into the 21st century. Travel around the clock, across the globe and throughout the United Kingdom for over 28 hours of continuous coverage. 2000 today. The celebrations begin New Year's Eve on BBC One.
They think it's all over in 35 minutes. Before that, on BBC One, there's a lot of money riding on a Christmas snog.
You're going to perk up before we hit the shops. I've got 2 novelty hot water bottles and some left-handed secateurs to track down by 5.
Right, you done all your Christmas shopping, Dolly?
I had till 2 silly fools in my bums and tums turn up bearing gifts. That's thrown me right out. Plus Bob's sister, who usually keeps my present pretty much at bath cube level, has upgraded me to a cafetiere. Have you opened it already? Well, how else do I know what price range I'm batting back with? I done her a germicidal hand cream, but actually that's not wasted. I can